Welcome to the McFeely Mess Podcast at Inforum.com. In-depth conversations and opinion covering a variety of topics from the world of news, sports, and more. Here's Mike McFeely.
We can consider this an emergency podcast at the McFeely Mess, or at least a semi-emergency podcast at the McFeely Mess, because I, Mike McFeely, have been in Sioux Falls for 4 days at the Summit League basketball tournaments, covering those from the North Dakota State angle. And so I didn't have a chance this week to really line up one of our usual newsy type guests or political type guests or Tammy Swift or Tracy Briggs or anybody else. And I don't mean this to be an insult to the guy who has found time to join me, but Eric Peterson, my sports colleague at the Forum, at the very last second, found some time for me to knock out 45 minutes or so on a variety of sports topics so I can be sure to post a podcast this week. So I want to thank him. And I'll just say it right to him since he's in the room with me. Thank you, Eric, for saving my bacon at the last minute here. I've been scrambling in Sioux Falls, trying to get all the scuttlebutt, all the speculation, all the stuff, cover games. And so I didn't have a chance to line something up. So you graciously agreed to join me here on the pod.
Well, it's spring and there's a lot of stuff going on in the sports world, surprisingly. So I guess that's what we're jumping into, right?
Let's do it this way, because I am completely unprepared for this podcast. So Usually I try to do a little bit of research and know what I want to talk about, but this is totally off the cuff. So I'll leave this up to you. I thought quickly of three things that we can talk about. We can talk about the Vikings and Sam Darnold. He's apparently their quarterback now, from what I understand.
Potentially.
Okay. We can talk about the Timberwolves, because you and I spend time in my office or at your desk talking a lot about the Minnesota Timberwolves, and you seem to have some reservations about them that maybe others don't. So we could talk about the Timberwolves. Or we could go down the Summit League road, since I was just down there and you're also at times helped cover that. And I had a McFeely tip sheet column at Inforum.com today, kind of outlining some of the players I think might be the men's players in the transfer portal within the next several weeks. So we can do those three topics, all three of them, some of them, none of them. I'll leave it up to you where you want to go.
Well, let's start with the Summit League, because you were there, you saw it. Let's start with the Bison women. I think on the verge of making and had a chance down the stretch to make their first NCAA Division I women's tournament, and just didn't have enough in the tank, or South Dakota State gave the knockout blow. But just your impressions of the championship game, and maybe what I don't know what to say, what's missing, or what needs to happen for NDSU to take that next little step.
Sure, and that NDSU women's basketball has been largely irrelevant for 20 years. I tried to tell people this year, and I think Dom Izzo did too, that this year's team is pretty good. They have some pieces with Elle Evans, Abby Draper, Heaven Hamling, four true freshmen who are playing. We thought they were pretty good, or at least better. And you've seen them too. You covered a couple of games as well. And they proved to be better than any other team in the Division I year, because they got to the Summit League championship game against South Dakota State, the perennial power that seems to go every year. If it's not South Dakota, it's South Dakota State. But NDSU had a chance last night. We're recording this on Wednesday. They had a chance yesterday afternoon, Tuesday, to actually win the Summit League championship and go to their first NCAA tournament. And they came up 13 points short, but I don't know that it was really a 13-point game. The Bison were within 1 point in the fourth quarter.
With about 6 minutes to play.
6 minutes to go, yeah.
And they had the ball down 1 point.
47-46, and Heaven Hamling had just scored 5 straight points, including a huge three-pointer. They were down 1 point. They got a stop on South Dakota State, so they were down 1 point. As you said, they had the ball with about 6 minutes left, and then Elle Evans made an ill-advised pass that was intercepted by South Dakota State. They turned it into a layup. NDSU had another turnover. The Jacks turned that into a 3-point play. And then before you know it, it was a 6, 7, 8, 10-point game, and it was over with about 4 minutes to go.
And Elle Evans hits her chin on the floor.
Yes,
and
got crushed by Paige Meyer.
And has to leave for a couple minutes to get fixed. And even there's another little moment. I think it was 49-46, and Elle Evans had a pretty good look at a three on the wing that just rims out. I mean, they just didn't. down the stretch, South Dakota State made every play it needed to make, and NDSU just didn't make any breaks. Like you said, the turnovers just made a couple too many mistakes, and maybe that's the having won that in that atmosphere before.
Well,
South Dakota, but it is a home game.
I mean, look, and this has been hashed and rehashed to death, but I'll do it now because I again experienced it yesterday. Is the Summit League tournament's a great thing, and it's really nice to have 8, 9, 10,000 people in the building because that's unlike many other mid-major conference tournaments. But ... it is completely a home game for South Dakota State.
Yeah.
It completely, to the point that it gets so loud and it gets so intense in there that you got to believe that it affects the officiating. It affects obviously the road team. It affects the Jacks because they feed off the energy and the momentum. I mean, it's a home game. It made a difference yesterday in the women's game, and then later on in the men's game when the Jackrabbit men beat Denver. It's a home game for South Dakota State.
It is, but you hear, most of the teams say it makes it's an atmosphere, but they'd rather play in that atmosphere. I think some of NDSU's
they say that
players.
Publicly.
Yeah, I know. But the flip side is, I know it's close, but Fargo's not that far. Fargo has the opportunity to travel more fans if they wanted to. And I think part of it is the continued success of those programs, why they go. If UND's women was on a run where they were going to 10 tournaments, maybe part of it's the success too. I know it's close to Brookings, but 200 miles, if people were into basketball at NDSU big time, you make that trip, don't you? So I'm not saying it would be... Because of the proximity, SDSU has the chance to have that many fans there because it's just right there. There's a lot of fans in Sioux Falls, but a lot of these programs, especially in the Dakotas, have the same opportunity. I get Denver, but Omaha, is that far from Sioux Falls?
No, but nobody cares about Omaha basketball.
But that's what I'm saying. It's more like you can't, in a way, punish or just not. We're not punishing them, but. It's not SDSU's fault that they care about basketball. That's what I'm saying.
No.
If Omaha had a huge fan base and traveled, maybe it would chip into it a little bit more.
And the proof in that pudding, you're right, is that the University of South Dakota also has a huge alumni base in Sioux Falls and in Vermilion and in the Twin Cities, and they just don't show up. There's 95% blue and 5% red in the Denny Premier Sanford Center, or Denny Sanford Premier Center.
It'd be like blaming NDSU fans for going to Frisco when they're in football, when they're filling.
It's 80, like a home game for the Bison and
is
Frisco.
Is that NDSU's fault that they fill 70% of the stadium?
No, that's the one thing that was always back in the day. People used to buy their Frisco tickets in August or whatever, and that's part of the Jackrabbit fans buy their tickets to the Summit League tournament the second they come out because they make it a 4-day vacation.
And that's what Tyler Merriman, is that what I'm saying his name? Merriam, yeah, the radio voice of South Dakota State. He goes, like, Sioux Falls, this was SDSU's Frisco, but now Frisco is SDSU's Frisco too because that's what I told. Going to both.
I was having a meal with Tyler yesterday in the media room at the Denny, and he said that same anecdote, and I said, well, the funny thing is now South Dakota State owns both Frisco and Sioux Falls.
That's what would have been kind of funny. Like at the point now that SDSU's football program is kind of the Frisco team, although NDSU did go last.
Yeah,
it's not like
it's only been 1 year since NDSU's been down.
But it would have been kind of coincidental if NDSU's women's team would have knocked off SDSU's women's team just to go to the tournament for the first time.
Right, but the other thing is, I asked Tyler, so do the Jacks fans travel to the NCAA basketball tournament, either men or women? And he said no, they really haven't, because you don't know where they're going, and the Summit League tournament is a year in advance that it's these 4 days or 5 days, and you could take time off and make it a thing, and so that the fans don't travel to Spokane or Dallas or Wichita or wherever the tournament starts. They just don't. So that's it. There's a limit to the fan base for the Jacks.
Well, let's just spin it forward. So obviously NDSU just couldn't, didn't make the plays down the stretch. Heaven Hamling's gone, big loss.
Mm-hmm.
Now this is assuming everybody stays, which we don't know if we can assume it.
I think women's basketball is a little different than men's. I don't think there's going to be a huge exodus. I don't know if there's going to be a huge exodus from the Bison men, but men's basketball is more of a transient sport.
But obviously the big one's Elle Evans. The 4 freshmen, I wouldn't think they would transfer, but who knows?
No, I don't think so.
Abby Schulte is a super senior, so she could come back. It seems like that's going to happen.
Yep.
NDSU has a lot of nice pieces, but I'm sure Jory knows. Jory Collins, if he's ever listening to this, I'm sure he knows this. I think they got to find a point guard.
Yeah,
a true point guard. I think Abby Schulte played point guard, and they did that because they wanted Heaven Hamling off the ball to free up some of her offense. But I think, my opinion, Abby Schulte is more of a 2-guard combo guard where she can play a little bit of point, but you don't want to put that much pressure on her because she's a very good defender. I think if you take some of that point guard workload off of her, it might even help her in other areas. So I think number one on the to-do list is find a true point guard for NDSU women's basketball.
I haven't talked to Jory about it, but the one thing you did notice yesterday was that Paige Meyer for South Dakota State was really good with the ball and could get around defenders and get to the basket and either shoot through contact or play through contact or dish to Brooklyn Meyer or another big. And that, I don't think NDSU, Heaven Hamlin could do some of that at the off guard, but you're right, NDSU just doesn't have that classic point guard to be able to do that and make something off the dribble, which then opens things up for other players. You're right. That's something that's missing. The other thing that's missing, and Jory referenced this in his post-game press conference, was South Dakota State's players are just bigger and stronger and thicker. Brooklyn Meyer is really good. I mean, she can take a beating under the basket and still finish. And it was noticeable yesterday that North Dakota State, they could get to the basket, but once they got bumped or there was contact, they had a tough time finishing. They did, and they missed a lot of layups, but some of that was credit to South Dakota State for being physical and getting a hand up and getting a body on them to kind of push them off their mark. Should there have been more fouls called? I don't know. I mean, you got to play. It's a tournament championship game.
But I will say this, though. NDSU's defense, I think, was right there with SDSU's defense for 35 minutes because Brooklyn Meyer was getting – how many turnovers did NDSU force?
Yeah, I'm not talking – I'm talking NDSU's offense. Defensively, they were fine. You're right.
But I think offensively, both teams were having the same struggles. But Koonin had some nice N1s. Krasinski was strong. I think they had flashes of to the basket. Where I think that totally disappeared, though, was in the last 5 or 6 minutes.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
And again, Jory referenced that.
Yeah, that maybe
when the Jacks are leaning on you for 35 minutes, that when you're smaller, it's like an offensive line versus a defensive line in football. You might be able to stick with them for a half or 3 quarters, but eventually the bigger, stronger offensive line is going to just wear down the defense, and that's what happened, I think, to NDSU in the last 5 minutes yesterday.
I get that, but still, I look back at that game. I think NDSU had some untimely turnovers that weren't necessarily forced.
Correct.
And South Dakota State hit their open 3 looks down the stretch. NDSU missed them. I mean, there were some miss and make parts of that, but maybe NDSU was missing because they're worn down. I mean, I think, but to the bigger point, we always talk about this. I think it was hard to go for where NDSU was to winning it in 1 year. Sure, it would have been great, but, it always seems like there's steps to it. Now NDSU got into a championship game. They got, before that, they flamed out last year in the first round as a 2 seed. Now it seems like they've taken that next step. All 3 games against SDSU, they're right there into the fourth quarter.
Into the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, into the last 5 minutes.
The 3 games are almost the same.
Yeah, yep, exactly. So that's the next step now. How do they find a way to win those last 5 minutes? But the flip side is NDSU's closed the gap, but is South Dakota State going to be better next year if they get healthier?
Well,
because they had a lot of key injuries as well.
Yeah, that's the other issue is that South Dakota State, I think, is going to be much better next year, and they're going to be deeper next year. And so NDSU has maybe elevated themselves to being the second best program in the Summit League. But South Dakota State, I think, takes a step forward next year as well. And so that's going to be the problem for the Bison.
The thing with NDSU that you like is Elle Evans, you think is probably going to get better, right? She still has stuff of her game to unlock. Avery Coonan, Abby Krasinski, I think are going to get better. Miralee Simon didn't play as much this year. She's kind of a physical presence that maybe as she develops, that helps too.
I think she was battling little nicks here and there too, that she's going to have to maybe get taken care of in the offseason.
But I think what you like about the freshmen, and Taryn Hamlin played, but to a lesser extent than those other three, they didn't look, I watched it on the broadcast, I wasn't there, you're in the building, they didn't look deer in headlights. I don't think those true freshmen looked like they were overwhelmed. And
I think they looked more deer in headlights in their first game, and then by their third game, they came out playing just fine.
Yeah,
they were just fine. It wasn't. I thought that maybe Elle Evans actually was forcing some things and looked a little bit tight early. Yeah. But again, South Dakota State's defense is really good. But I thought the true freshmen looked fine. But the Bison women are fine. They're going to be fine. It's, can they get good enough to catch South Dakota State? That's a whole different question. But it goes back to the issue of if you can keep getting to the title game, keep knocking on that door, someday you're going to knock it down. Yep. And someday, and this is Kolpak's theory, is at some point South Dakota State's going to shoot 29% in the championship game. They came close yesterday for the first half, and NSU just couldn't get a lead. And so that, it's the Bison women are going to be fine.
Yeah. One last thing, and we'll leave it there. That's what I thought was NDSU's chance in that game yesterday. Was they created 8 early turnovers. But they didn't build a lead. Like if they get up 8 to 10 points and could have had a cushion, play with a little bit of a lead, I think you give yourself a better chance. Defensively, I thought NDSU played a masterful game for 3+ quarters.
Yeah, they were switching to a 2-3 zone that had South Dakota State baffled. They were kind of switching in and out of that. The Jacks couldn't figure out a way to get the ball to Brooklyn Meyer when the Bison were in that 2-3 zone. The Bison sometimes doubled or even tripled Brooklyn Meyer once she got the ball. Sometimes they didn't. And so they were kind of trying to confuse her as to when the pressure was going to come and where it was going to come from. So they did a good job there.
But again, here's the thing. If you want to look, if NDSU to win, they needed to have things go their way and get the breaks. But I just even look at the little things like, was it Byam?
Yes.
She hits 2 3-pointers. She's hit 5 all year. SDSU got those little performances when everyone else was struggling, and then their two main players closed it.
The NDSU's strategy, literally, and Jory said this after the game, and we knew it even before the game, was they were going to leave 2 players from South Dakota State open to shoot threes because they just said we're going to pick our poison. And these 2, Tori Nelson and
Byam. Yeah, I can't remember her first name. Sorry,
just aren't 3-point shooters. They picked their poison, and those 3 girls combined for 3 3-pointers, and they had a combined, 12 all year. Yep. And so they made them. They made the plays when they had to make them.
It Mesa Byam, by the way.
But that's a championship program.
Yeah, that's what you do.
When it's winning time, that's what a championship program does.
But that's my point. NDSU needed some periphery player. Like I said, the freshmen had their moments, but to hit a big shot, and just nobody from NDSU could find. After Hamlin's 3 that cut it to 47-46, after that, there wasn't really any big-time shots that NDSU hit in the last 5+ minutes.
But an improved year for the NDSU women. I had a column in today's paper, or online, I should say, at inform.com, where I kind of pieced together some of the speculation and the scuttlebutt and the gossip that I heard in Sioux Falls about which players on the men's side might be in different uniforms next year, right? That's one of the things that we have talked about a lot the last couple of years, even in Fargo, because the Bison and Dave Richmond, the head coach, lost their best player from a year ago, Grant Nelson, to the transfer portal when he went to Alabama. St. Thomas last year lost their best player. Andrew Rohde went to Virginia. Oral Roberts lost their best player, Max Asmus, who went to Texas. South Dakota State a couple of years ago lost their best player, Baylor Shireman. He went to Creighton. There have been other, Josiah Alec from Kansas City, good player. He moved. Just a bunch of players from the Summit League have moved up to Power 5 conferences. it's likely there's going to be more this year. We don't know for sure who, but we can label it speculation and speculate about it. The 5 guys I speculated would be the top possibilities after talking with a bunch of people in Sioux Falls. And I won't say what levels, but I'll just say a bunch of people in different areas of the college basketball hierarchy. The number one name that came up time and time again, Zeke Mayo from South Dakota State. Fantastic player. He's the number one guy that people think is going to transfer to a different level. Number 2 guy, William Kyle III, South Dakota State, right? I mean, 6'9", 220, freakishly athletic, and I mean that in a good way, a complimentary way. He's a possibility to transfer. Frankie Fiddler from Omaha. He's a dude. I mean, he can score. 6'7", 220, can score from all 3 levels, Eric, as coaches like to say. He's a very strong possibility, in my opinion, to transfer. B.J. Omat from North Dakota. There was some talk last year that he was going to transfer last year. Under-recruited kid from Mankato. He's up at UND. He can score. He's a good player. He can play some defense. He's long. 6'7", I want to say as well. 6'6", 6'7".
6'7", yeah, in that range.
Yep, that type of kid. And the 5th possibility, and I think this is more of an outside possibility, but I'm going to put it out there, Andrew Morgan from North Dakota State. 6'10", kind of a traditional post, but he can hit some threes. Big, strong, agile, can move. I think he's a possibility to transfer, but I think he's a lesser possibility for various reasons. Number 1 being that has 1 year of eligibility left, and he's a farm guy who's majoring in agriculture at North Dakota State, which is a top ag school. So those are the 5 guys I think might be the top possibilities to transfer. Your thoughts?
All those sound like good candidates, and just, from a big perspective, guys like Frankie Fiddler and B.J. Omat types are like the perfect modern day basketball player. Just 6'7" wings, like you said, you can score. Zeke Mayo, we thought might have been gone before this year. He hung around another year, and now for South Dakota State, not that it hurts you, but now that he's won a Summit Championships, going to NCAA tournaments, SDSU, like what's left for Zeke Mayo? He was Player of the Year. What's really left for him to do in the Summit League?
Is to cash in.
No, what's the benefit of him?
I think he cashed in the Summit League this year, by the way. The word is that he was getting some NIL from South Dakota State, which is fine. It's legal.
Kyle's got the athleticism. I wonder if staying at SDSU might not be the best spot for him. I still think he's a little raw offensively. Mm-hmm. He can dunk,
he's
for
limited,
sure.
He's limited what he can do offensively. And he's not a very good, he's about a 57% free throw shooter.
But he can block shots, he can rebound, and he can be dynamic around the rim.
Yep, so. Explosive. And, anytime you get an explosive, strong athlete, he can block shots. He can dunk. He's going to dunk on people, and that matters. Being explosive and athletic at 6'9" that's a positive.
The thing is, we just don't know what the motivation is. For some people, is all right. I'm going to cash in money. Some people, maybe money isn't the issue. I just want to play in a power conference. There's just all these factors we don't know. But
we don't know who's whispering in their ear. Yep. That's a big factor as well.
Their AAU coach or their trainer, but there's all these periphery people that
high school coach, their family,
their uncle, or just anybody. Yep. So, but I think it's a solid list, and I think there's a good chance at least a couple of them are gone. I don't know if the full list is gone, but I think 2 to 3 is fair to say might be not in the Summit League next year.
Over under, I would put at
2.5.
2.5. That's about right. Yeah.
I think I might go over on 2.5.
Yeah.
I think 3.
I think
it's tough. I think it's 2 to 3.
If I had to bet $5, I would bet Mayo,
I think Fiddler's gone.
Omat, and Fiddler. Those are the 3 I would bet. And I have no inside information on any of them. I want to make that clear. I'm total speculation.
Yeah. But they're just Zeke Mayo can score. That's valued all over the place. Yep. Frankie Fiddler can score. He's 6'7". He's a wing. He
was really impressive.
Yes.
I've seen Frankie Fiddler play several times before. in person. This was the first year. I'm not sure I saw Omaha this year in Fargo in person. Might have been out of town for something, but I saw him 3 games in Sioux Falls. He's good. I mean, he's a good basketball player. He is 6'7". He's much thicker than he was. Got a chance to go to an Omaha practice and stood next to him. And he's a big kid.
Well, I listened on the broadcast. I can't remember if it was Midco or what, but it was on CBS Sports. But they said he added 15 pounds to his frame from last year.
His legs are thick, and that's what like I said, I was 2 feet away from a practice. I'm like going, geez, he is like an oak tree now.
So that's what probably turned him in from being a good player last year to being whatever, could have been player in the player of the year conversation in the league.
He is from Bellevue, Nebraska, which I think is pretty much either a suburb or a bedroom community of Omaha. And so
you connecting some dots to Creighton, Mike?
No, because he's playing for Omaha. So it's a two-edged sword. It's people at Omaha might say, well, that means he's going to stick around Omaha and play for Omaha since he's from here. But if you want to play conspiracy theory, there's a private school in Omaha that pays really well in the NIL market, and even for bench players.
And they've already gone to the Summit League to get Baylor Shireman.
And their head coach knows this region very well because he coached at North Dakota State and at UND, and Greg McDermott. So Creighton, if you want to connect the dots, that's an obvious one for Frankie Fiddler.
And William Kyle played
Kyle's
at the same high school as Frankie Fiddler.
A year apart, I think, yep.
That was probably a pretty good high school team when one was a senior. They didn't win the state championship.
They got to the finals twice, but did not win it. So they must have some really good basketball players in Nebraska.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty dynamic team to me.
But the University of Nebraska, obviously in Lincoln, is not too far away, and they need players too. They're better, but they're looking for players too. And that part of it doesn't matter.
Or any Big Ten team, or maybe Kansas.
Any team.
There's plenty of teams, right?
Andrew Rohde went to Virginia in the ACC, and he's from Wisconsin.
And everyone thought last year he's going to Wisconsin because he's from Wisconsin.
And that's what I heard, is that he was going to go to Wisconsin.
But he might have thought that, and then Virginia comes in. Hey, maybe we'll give you a better offer. Okay, let's go to Virginia.
A kid like B.J. Omat. I don't know. He's from Mankato. Does Ben Johnson at Minnesota look at a kid like that, or is he going? Could he go? You never know the connections.
Yeah.
There might be a coach that recruited him, 3 years ago, who's now coaching out east somewhere or something, or who knows the AAU coach. Or it's all that web behind the scenes that we don't know about. Before
we move on, I'll throw you one little bit of speculation in that regard. Iowa recruited Andrew Morgan heavily out of high school.
Yes. Yep.
I'm thinking if Andrew Morgan does leave, and like you said, you're leaning towards he doesn't, would Iowa be a landing spot?
Would Minnesota be a landing spot for him? You just don't know. They all have big collectives now. And I have not talked with Andrew Morgan about this. Haven't talked with anybody at NDSU. Haven't talked with anybody other than just, you just look at him and go, who could be a player from NDSU who could play at another level? And frankly, he might be the only one. And so, because he's maybe Noah Feddersen, because he's also 6'10" and can move.
And obviously we know Bowden Scunberg's leaving, but we'll see. It'll be interesting to see what level he ends up at.
He said he's
another
mid
major, a high major. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
Don't know.
Are we saving the best for last then? The Vikings?
You go ahead. Go for it.
Well, you go
Sam
for it.
Darnold. You texted me yesterday. I think it said Sam Darnold. I said, "Yep, I know nothing about the guy." So is this Kirk Cousins left? Followed the money, which is whatever. Good for him. Went to Atlanta. Yep. So Kirk Cousins is gone. Vikings need a quarterback for this year because we think they're going to draft a quarterback in April. And so how that turns out, whether they stay with what pick do they have right now?
They're at 11.
11, or do they trade up? Do they have anything to trade up for to get a better quarterback? We don't know. But anyway, it appears they're going to sign Sam Darnold, a journeyman, mediocre journeyman from what we can tell, and then possibly, we think, draft a quarterback in the first round with either the 11th pick or something higher. Is that what we think is going to happen?
Potentially. I think Sam Darnold is an insurance policy. I think you want him to be your Alex Smith, to use a Kansas City reference, when they drafted Pat Mahomes, a guy who can maybe start the first 5 or 6 games, but if they do get a quarterback, You don't want him to be too much competition. And if the Vikings do draft a rookie quarterback and he plays well, I think Sam Darnold's an upgrade as a backup. I think he's better than Nick Mullins. I think he's better than anything they had on the roster.
Better than Josh Dobbs?
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe not for that game and a half, but beyond that game and a half, yes.
The astronaut was like the thing, and I just kept saying, and you kept saying, it's like the guy's been in like 7 teams in 3 years, so there's a reason for that. But anyway, Sam Darnold,
they can go 2 routes. I think it's going to go Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, whatever. Williams first, and then those 2 guys. But I think that's going to be the top 3 picks. Everyone's been like, J.J. McCarthy's the guy the Vikings want. I just don't know if they have the firepower to trade up. I don't know if it's worth trading the extra picks to trade up to get J.J. McCarthy, in my opinion. I think we talk every year. These quarterbacks, this guy's going to go 20th, 2 months ago in mock drafts. Those guys always, it doesn't matter. They always move up the board. So
because quarterbacks are valuable and teams overvalue them.
Yes. Or they don't overvalue them. They're like, well, if we hit on this, if you're right on a running back, fine. If you're right on a quarterback, that changes the trajectory of your franchise.
Yes.
But that said, you go 2 routes. You either McCarthy falls to him, or if they like Bo Nix from Oregon falls to him, you take them. If all the quarterbacks you like are off the board and you don't feel like the price to go up is worth it, then do you draft a Dallas Turner from Alabama, a Jared Verse from Florida State, a cornerback? Keep on adding to that defense because I like the defensive moves
they made some defensive moves too.
Yeah, even though they lost Daniil Hunter, they got Jonathan Grenard from the Houston Texans. Andrew Van Ginkel, who played at South Dakota State, another edge rusher. Blake Cashman from the Gophers at linebacker. So they've made some nice moves there. Aaron Jones, the running back from Green Bay. But
yes.
My point is, then do you maybe look at getting a Michael Penix early in the second round? I think in their first 2 picks, they're going to draft a quarterback, but they got to figure out. And it's risky to say, well, we're going to get Penix in the second round because what if he gets drafted? So I think they have to come out of this with the quarterback because we haven't seen much of him. Jaron Hall, I don't know if he's the answer. I know there's rumors out there that maybe Trey Lance. Do they go if they whiff from the draft? Do they go get a Trey Lance?
Boy, but he is as unproven. But is that any different than having Sam Darnold?
But then you just create open competition. Like, all right, both you guys compete. It's not
okay.
I'm saying, okay, this is plan D, C, E, F. Like, this is not your top plan,
right?
Or a lot of people speculate the Bears haven't traded Justin Fields yet because they'll wait to see who becomes most desperate. If Minnesota whiffs on quarterbacks, do they try to make a play for Justin Fields, or are the Bears like, we'll trade him, but we're not going to trade him to the Vikings. We want to trade him to the different, the AFC or a different division. So that's the thing. I just don't know if Justin Fields. I don't know if Minnesota likes him, and 2, if they do, I just don't think the Bears are going to trade him within the division. I wouldn't think so.
From what I've read, the Vikings tried to sign Cousins, but they weren't going to. They weren't going to break the bank. They weren't going to leverage the whole franchise for Kirk Cousins because they had other needs, and they addressed some of them on defense, and they believe that they can get a quarterback in the draft or through a trade that is going to be good enough. And so do you like that approach? Do you like the approach the Vikings didn't want to give Kirk Cousins 4 years at $180 million with, I think, $100 million guaranteed for Cousins, and instead they're going to try to find a different quarterback, and then they focused on signing the defensive help they needed with an edge rusher and the other players they got. Do you think that's a better approach than?
I think it's the right decision, but that doesn't mean the Vikings might not be markedly worse next year. Here's my thing. he's what, 35, will be 36 next year. He's coming off an Achilles. Obviously, this is all the talking points everyone talks about. But to me, it's not like they were winning big in the playoffs with him. If they're consistently winning 2 or 3 playoff games a year, getting to the NFC Championship game, on the edge of a Super Bowl, I'm like, overpay, just get it done. They've won 1 playoff game, and whether it's his fault, the organization's fault, not putting the right pieces around him, a combination of both, which I think it is. As constructed, this team wasn't going anywhere. And I think at some point you got to rip the Band-Aid off and find a new quarterback. And it's not easy. You can be in the quarterback abyss and be brutal for a bunch of years.
Which the Vikings were before Kirk Cousins.
But Kirk Cousins, everyone talked about it. He had 18 touchdown passes in the first 8 games when he played. They're 4-4. I mean, like I said, I'm not blaming him, but at some point...
I'm more of the boat, and I don't disagree with them letting him go. That I don't know that at his age he's worth the money that Atlanta's paying him. Atlanta has a different motivation apparently for wanting a quarterback. They think they're closer to the Super Bowl maybe than the Vikings are.
But to let the point out, well, I'll let you make your point.
My point is, Cousins was always the guy that people were bashing early on. Like, to me, he was the least of their problems. He was a functional, above-average quarterback. I think that the offensive line was never good enough. The defense was never good enough. They had other problems besides Cousins. So I'm sort of in the middle, wishy-washy, riding the fence that the Vikings' failures weren't his fault. It was other problems but I'm also okay with them letting him go and starting over.
I don't totally absolve him because you'd see him at the end of the games and they'd need a drive and he'd just throw a ridiculous interception.
Short of the chains.
Short
of the change.
His turnovers were a problem. The numbers are fine. He fumbled a lot. He threw a lot of bad interceptions in games. A lot of his numbers seem to be compiled in some games when they're down and he throw for 350 because they're down the whole game. He's a good quarterback. Don't get me wrong. I think it works for Atlanta, and this is part of the Vikings front office issue. They've got Drake London, a young receiver on a rookie contract. They got Bijan Robinson, a young, good running back on a rookie contract. They got Kyle Pitts, which we can decide whether we think Kyle Pitts is good or not. Another young piece. They have the young rookie scale guys around them. The Vikings have not drafted many good young rookies other than Jordan Addison in the last few. I mean, Kwesi's got hit on 1 draft pick, I think, so far. There's a couple other ones that the jury's out on still. But in 2 years, to be good, even like Kansas City, Willie Gay, L'Jarius Sneed, they just on their defense, they knew they had to go with rookie guys, and they Trent McDuffie. Like, there's like 3 or 4 starter level guys on rookie contracts. Even with Patrick Mahomes, you have to draft well, because if you pay your quarterback, I don't care if it's Kirk Cousins, Patrick Mahomes, or whatever, if you don't hit in the draft, you're done for, because that's the only way to build your team.
The rookie contracts are important because they open up cap space for the quarterback.
Yes.
To pay him huge money.
And even look at this year, I mean, Kansas City wasn't like smooth sailing. I mean, it took them a while to kind of get their bearings. I mean, the receivers are dropping passes left and right, and now they're going to have to probably go into the draft and hopefully hit on a receiver, which you probably can. I mean, that's the other thing. Like but that's so back to this big picture thing. So if the Vikings say they draft J.J. McCarthy or Bo Nix or whoever it is, if that guy works, that opens up a whole host of possibilities with the rest of your team for the next 3 or 4 years.
Because then you have a quarterback on a rookie contract for 4 years.
Like the San Francisco 49ers model right now.
Yes.
Brock Purdy, they're like he that's even like better. Like they're paying him like $700,000. Like he's a 7th round draft pick rookie quarterback.
Yes.
And you can pay.
So then you can pay everybody else around him,
Debo
because
Samuel,
you're paying your quarterback
yep,
nothing.
Yep. So they've gone with, we're going to pay Cousins and try to build around him. That didn't work. So now maybe the swing is, all right, let's get a rookie quarterback, which is, again, no guarantee. And now let's build around him. And even now you're seeing that in Houston. They paid Danielle Hunter 2 years close to $50 million. Why? Because they have C.J. Stroud at quarterback. Rookie quarterback. Had about as good a rookie year as you can hope from a quarterback. Now they have 3 years of him, on the cheap, and they can build around them. So that's the Kirk Cousins big money quarterback didn't work for whatever reason. I'm not blaming him necessarily. It just didn't work. Now I think because last year when he went down, when their defense was playing better and Dobbs was giving you a little bit, they were in most games. I mean, even that last game against Detroit, they had a chance to go win the game at the end, and Nick Mullins threw a just ridiculous interception right to. So as bad as things were, look, Detroit almost went to the Super Bowl. Last game of the regular season, Detroit had something to play for in the seeding perspective. The Vikings still had, a faint hope.
Chance of making the playoffs.
So if they can get a quarterback who's efficient, doesn't turn it over, and the defense gets better, maybe you win in a different style. But the problem with that is, though, you still have to score points in the NFL. You can't. Your defense can take some of the load off your offense, but in the end, you've got to be able to score some points.
I think we're going to end it there. I brought up the Timberwolves, but we don't have much time left, and I'm exhausted. So I don't want to do that. And you just hate Rudy Gobert, so I don't want to hear about it.
I don't hate him. I think he's won me over a little bit compared to what I was. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, he got hurt last night in the game against the Clippers. I don't know. I don't know the severity, but he took a shoulder to the ribs, and it didn't look good.
I know you're tired, but we'll just sum it up. I just think the Wolves are just too beat up to make a run now. With Karl Anthony Towns being out, even if he comes back, he's been out. How
that was a huge injury. That totally blew up their season. The Wolves were good. Yeah. You and I differ here. Is that you thought the Wolves were not necessarily a number one type seed in the West. I did, and then Cat got hurt, and now Gobert is hurt. Don't know the severity of Gobert's injury, but like I said, it looked like ribs, which is not good. And I really liked what the Wolves had put together. And I watched the games. I watched all the games.
I thought they were good. I'm just being nitpicky from a team that can do it in the playoffs is what I was looking at. Like they're whatever they do in the regular season.
You've said for 2 years they screwed up on the Gobert trade and they should trade Cat.
I still think they should trade Cat.
Oh. Let's save this for another one. This is now you're. Not, okay, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay, we'll save the Gobert part. I thought it was a bad trade at the beginning. Now I think it's fine. But the Cat thing, I just don't think you can play two big men in the playoffs. I just don't think you can. And I think Cat, and it's too late now, is a big guy who's getting older, and I would have just traded him for a wing. That said, that deal might not have been out there.
Yeah,
because it's hard. Other people are seeing it.
And I have been a Cat, Karl Anthony Towns, by the way.
Yes, sorry.
I've been a Cat critic for the last several years because I thought he was just too immature, too whiny, too bitchy.
But I don't think that's changed that much.
I think it has.
A little bit, but not enough.
My wife and I are NBA addicts now, and I watch all the Timberwolves games. And he still gets into it sometimes, but he has done a lot better this year, and especially the last couple of months. He's kind of gotten away from griping about every single call. He's gotten away from dogging back on defense while he's griping at the referees. He's gotten away from that, and he's played well. And I think he was coming into his own, and then he hurt his knee. I think Anthony Edwards, on the other hand, still has a ways to go in that category.
He's 22. That's what I think people forget. And
okay, but he's what? Okay, he is something. I mean, Edwards is something else, man. I mean, he just got to stop whining and play basketball.
22, Cat's 28, 29. My point is, it's hard to be the guy at 22. Like, you look at Jason Tatum, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, all those guys took a while. LeBron is the outlier. He's the guy at that age was fine, but it takes a while in the NBA to be the guy. And I'm not saying Cat might not, and I agree. He has some immaturity at times. In the fourth quarter, he tries to play isolation.
You said Cat, you mean Ant.
Yeah, Ant. Yeah. Isolation ball, and the offense just goes to a grinding. That's their biggest problem. their fourth quarter offense has been their biggest problem. Even when Cat was healthy, they'd have leads and then get to the fourth quarter, and
and despite all of that, they're a half game out of first place in the Western Conference, which is way tougher than the Eastern Conference.
But the biggest problem the Wolves have is just the CBA changed. So next year, when they're expensive, now they have this second apron where you can't do anything. So they finally get good, and like the financial constrictions get worse. And on top, like if they'd had this team like 5 or 6 years ago, you'd be like, wow, this is awesome. But like you said, the West is just...
Denver's really good.
Yep.
Oklahoma City's really good. The Clippers, despite losing a 22-point lead to the Wolves last night, the Clippers are dangerous.
The Suns are loaded.
Yeah.
Sacramento.
Denver kind of started slow this year. They got Jokic, and he is so good. He is so good.
But Denver's they're in that San Antonio mode now. Let's just get to the postseason healthy, and then we'll turn it on. Then we'll not turn it on, but we know how to win there.
Yeah, turn it on.
Well, yeah.
Same thing.
Sacramento is a bad matchup for the Wolves if you want to look from a playoff perspective. I mean, even like New Orleans, if Zion Williamson's healthy.
But all of that said, the Timberwolves are a half game out of first place.
But here's the flip side. If the way things are going now, if the Wolves are the 1 or 2 seed and you see Golden State or like the Lakers in the first round of the tournament, do you think that's an automatic win for the Timberwolves?
We're at 45 minutes, so here's what I know. It ain't going to matter because the Boston Celtics are going to win this NBA championship this year.
No, they're not.
Boom. We'll talk about that in our next pod, and I'll bring in my wife, and she will beat you senseless for saying that. This has been the Mike McFeely Mess Podcast. Eric Peterson, my guest. Thank you again to him on short notice for doing this because I needed something. Thanks for listening. We'll be back again.
Thanks for listening to the McFeely Mess Podcast at inforum.com. For more podcasts and columns, head to inforum.com and search Mike McFeely.